Hi everyone, it's Dr. Z. Here we are in New Imperialism Part II. And I am sorry, I didn't realize that the timer was coming to an end and the last video cut off in the middle of the story about the Battle of Ottawa. So the Italians were lost significantly. After the battle, because the post is very slow at that time, about 2-3 months later, families of soldiers started to get mail telling them, we don't have good shoes, our guns don't work, we're poorly provisioned, we don't have good maps. So after they even, imagine being a family member saying, getting a letter that says your son has died in this war, we're very sorry for your loss, and we're grateful for his service. And then a couple months go by and you get a letter from him because it took that long to arrive, right? And you think, oh, my son was this great war hero. And then you get this letter saying that the Italian army didn't even give him good shoes. You'd be pretty upset. So that's exactly what happened. And so many people were so upset so many Italian families were so upset after this, that they blockaded the trains so that no more Italian soldiers could leave Italy. And the Prime Minister, Francesco Crispi, actually had to resign because people were so upset about it. What's the big takeaway though, right? Is that if you're not the only side with machine guns, right? You need to actually have some training and some good thought, right? And so I wonder if we've got a few machine guns, we don't really need to train this army. We don't really need to be well provisioned or have good maps. That was probably the thought behind it, which is a poor way to think. So another aspect that your AP gods want you to understand is that there were diplomatic tensions because of imperialism among European states that strained the alliance system. An example of this is the Fashoda crisis. Basically, there's a French army and a British army, and they're in Sudan, and they happen to just kind of come across each other while they're near this White Nile River. And they didn't expect to see each other. And so there was no battle planned or anything like that. They met on friendly terms. Oh, hey, you guys are here. Oh yeah, we're here too. We're not really sure whose territory this is, right? So why don't we go and send word back to our metropoles to try to figure out whose land is this, right? Which is ironic in of itself. However, news of the meeting was relayed to Paris and London, where it inflamed the imperial pride of both nations. So people got really upset and they started accusing the other side of naked expansionism and aggression. And the crisis continued throughout September and October of 1898. Both nations began to mobilize their fleets in preparation for war against each other. French people increasingly questioned the wisdom of a war over this part of Africa, and the French government quietly ordered its soldiers to withdraw on the 3rd of November, and the crisis ended. And part of the reason for this was because the Dreyfus Affair was happening at the same time. And the French public was so distracted by that, and so they didn't need to pay too much attention to really what was going on in the Sudan, and eventually everything just resolved itself very peacefully. But there is this political cartoon where we've got a French poodle on the right and the British bulldog on the left. And you'll notice the bone in the middle of the bowl there that the British bulldog has his paw in says Fashoda. And the poodle is begging for scraps from a British bulldog, right? Oh, well, if I can't have the bone, I'll be satisfied if you just give me one of the scraps. So an historian said about the Fashoda crisis, between the two governments, there was a brief battle of wills, with the British insisting on immediate and unconditional French withdrawal from Fashoda. The French had to accept these terms, mounting to a public humiliation, and Fashoda was long remembered in France as an example of British brutality and injustice. So one of the other aspects on your key concept outline is to understand what primitivism in art is, and I've tasked you on your study guides to look up artists like Gauguin and Picasso. This is an example of a primitivist painting by Gauguin, and other paintings from this genre are much more exploitative than this one. And so what your big question should be is, what does it mean when white European artists are painting people of color in areas that the Europeans colonized? What is that all about? Picasso's examples also were influenced by African art. So look at the sculpture, the mask at the bottom on the right, and then look at the images of the women that Picasso has painted. But yet also, as I said, a lot of these are quite exploitative. And so in class, we'll be talking about that and what it actually means. Your key concept outline also wants you to understand that there were other challenges to imperialism as well. The Battle of Ottawa is a good example, but that as non-Europeans became educated in Western values, they started to challenge European imperialism through nationalist movements, right? Because the big irony of new imperialism is that the nations in Europe are brand new. And they're telling everyone else, you cannot be a nation. Self-determination is for European nations alone, not for anyone in the colonies. So China's Boxer Rebellion is a great example of this type of response that was a challenge to European imperialism. They had a secret organization called the Society of the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. And you see pictures of the Boxer soldiers here on the left. And they led an uprising in northern China against the spread of Western and Japanese influence there. We have to remember that Japan was building a sphere of influence as well and is seen as an imperial power. The rebels, referred to by Westerners as boxers because they performed physical exercises that they believed would make them able to withstand bullets. They also killed foreigners. They also killed Chinese Christians, destroyed foreign property, and from June to August, the Boxers besieged the foreign district of Beijing, then called Peking. And so this is where a lot of the international troops were. And China's capital, until an international force that included American troops subdued the uprising. And by the terms of the Boxer Protocol, which officially ended the rebellion in 1901. The Meiji Restoration is another example that your AP Gods would put under these challenges to European colonialism because Japan sees itself as a colonial empire in itself. So this is the restoration of practical imperial rule to Japan in 1868 under Emperor Meiji. Although there were emperors before the Meiji Restoration, the events restored practical abilities and consolidated the political system under the Emperor of Japan. And the goals of the restored government were expressed by the new emperor in the Charter Oath, which I've given you a link there to it. I highly recommend you read it, and it'll give you kind of a sense of what some of those reforms of this new restored government would be. So it led to enormous changes in Japan's political and social structure, was responsible for the emergence of Japan as a modernized nation. And that's sort of the takeaway that historians often think of when they think of the Meiji Restoration. So it's the restoration of the empire. They also abolished the samurai class. If you read the document, it says that there really shouldn't be class distinctions. It instills the conscription, that's the draft, right, for people to serve in the military. So this mandatory conscription. Extend the right to bear arms to every male in the nation. So not just the samurai, right? So this is the idea behind it. And of what do we see as a result? Rapid industrialization and what's called gunboat diplomacy, which your book explains really well. So I encourage you to go to your book for that, right? That Japan needs to start trading with foreign powers, and that is the way that that's going to happen. So if we look at some of the data, though, the empirical data behind it, you can see how many more train tracks were laid in this time period, and also the size of the merchant fleet and number of steamships, and just how they increased exponentially as a result of that industrialization and gunboat diplomacy in the Meiji Restoration. Now, I'll end by just kind of giving you another aside to this whole period, because the new imperialism, right? We know that this is the age of nations and nationalism for Europeans. It's the age of new imperialism. Yet Europe was losing immigrants. This is the beginning of European emigration, right? Meaning Europeans leaving, right, for places like the United States. It wasn't just the United States, but also Canada, places in South America, that Europeans were moving to. So if we look at the numbers from 1841 to 1850, and then from 1851 to 1860, right? If we add those two columns together, we see that between 1841 and 1860, right, there's quite a number of people who are leaving, right? The biggest numbers obviously come out of Ireland because of the potato famine. But lots of people are leaving Germany, right? Other unspecified places in Great Britain, right? Of course, Ireland, even Norway and Sweden, and of course, France. So it's really significant that Europeans are leaving, right? And why? Some to the colonies, but this particular one is to the United States, right? So we recognize from U.S. immigration, right, the reasons. It's a push-pull. It's a push-pull. New opportunities, that's the pull, right? And either conflict or political issues, or for most people, economics is the push. So if we look at the immigrants by region during 50-year periods, and I want you to focus mainly on this one here, right? Pie charts show by 50-year periods the number of immigrants who came to America. Okay, so again, this is to the United States. So from 1870 to 1919, 23 million come from Europe. Okay, and the chart uses the word legal. I personally think undocumented is a much better word, so I just put that there. All right, my friends, we are at the end. I look forward to your questions and thoughts when we discuss all of this in class. So long.